On July 23, 1892, a man sat at his desk in Pittsburgh. His name was Henry Clay Frick. A second later, an anarchist burst into the office. 2 shots rang out. The bullet entered Frick's neck, the second lodged at the base of his skull. But Frick did not fall. He stood up. The attacker, Alexander Berkman, realized that the pistol had not worked as intended and pulled out a sharpened file. He struck Frick 3 times, in the side, in the leg, in the thigh. Blood soaked the expensive suit, the carpet, the papers on the desk. The secretary screamed in horror. It seemed like the end. Any other person would have died from pain shock or blood loss within minutes. But Henry Frick was not made of flesh. He was made of coke and steel. When the police finally subdued the attacker, Frick refused anesthesia. He himself felt for the bullet in his neck with his fingers, while the doctor prepared the instruments. He allowed himself to be bandaged, sat back down at the blood-soaked desk, and continued working. He did not go home until he had signed the last documents of the day. That evening he wrote a note to his partner. "I have been shot twice, but I am still in form." Remember this image. A man who refuses to die because he has work to do. Now let's jump 20 years forward and 300 miles east. New York, 5th Avenue. We stand before a building that least resembles the office of a steel magnate. It is not a factory, not a skyscraper. It is a low, elegant limestone mansion, as if transported from the French province of the 18th century. Inside, silence. The air smells of old varnish, fresh flowers, and money that has stopped bustling and become eternity. Here, at number 1 on East 70th Street, there is no smell of soot, no cries of workers, no blood. Here hang works by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Turner. Light falls softly on the marble floors. It seems that this house was built by a poet, an aesthete, a man of the finest spiritual sensitivity who devoted his life to serving beauty. But that is a lie. This temple of art was built by the same man who, 20 years earlier, sat in a pool of his own blood and calmly dictated letters. The man whom the press called the most hated man in America. The man whose name was synonymous with cruelty. How is this possible? How could a demon of industrial capitalism, ready to drown a city in blood for profit, and a guardian angel of world art coexist in one soul? Many know the Frick collection. Everyone knows his name. But almost no one understands that this mansion is not just a house. This is a fortress built on feelings of guilt, loss, and icy hatred toward the only person he considered his equal. The story of Henry Clay Frick is not a story of success. It is a story of war. War with competitors, war with workers, war with himself. And most importantly, this house, which today delights millions of tourists, was actually conceived as a weapon in a duel that was supposed to end only in hell. To understand how blood turned into paint on the canvases of great masters, we need to go back to where it all began. Not to the palaces of New York, but to the black, smoking furnaces of Pennsylvania. To where a young, unknown accountant grasped one terrible truth. To build paradise, one must first pass through hell. Henry Clay Frick was not born in the smoke of steel mills, but in the sweet, intoxicating smell of rye whiskey. The setting, West Overton, Pennsylvania, mid-19th century. His grandfather, Abraham Overholt, was a patriarch of the Mennonites and owner of a thriving distillery. It was an environment of strict discipline, thrift, and quiet accumulation of wealth. Little Henry was a weak child. Doctors doubted he would live to adulthood. He often fell ill, was skinny and pale. But psychology teaches us, physical weakness in childhood is often compensated by a monstrous will to power in maturity. While other boys played ball, Henry counted. He loved numbers. Numbers didn't hurt, didn't betray, and always told the truth. At 21, he worked as a bookkeeper in his grandfather's store. But his gaze was fixed not on the whiskey barrels, but on the horizon where the sky blackened with smoke. Pittsburgh was turning into the forge of the world. Everyone talked about steel. Everyone wanted to build railroads and bridges. But Frick saw what thousands of other adventurers missed. To smelt steel, you need not just heat. You need coke, coal purified of impurities in special furnaces. Steel is the body of the Industrial Revolution, but coke is its blood. Without coke, blast furnaces are cold and dead. Frick understood a simple formula. Whoever controls the fuel holds by the throat those who produce metal. In 1871st year, when he was only 21 years old, he and several partners bought the first coal lands and built the simplest furnaces resembling beehives. Success seemed inevitable. But then history struck. The year 1873 arrived. The financial panic crashed America's economy. Banks burst like soap bubbles. Railroads declared default. The price of coke plummeted from $4 per ton to 90 cents. Frick's partners were horrified and wanted to sell the business for next to nothing, just to save something. At that moment, Henry Clay Frick showed his true face. Where others saw collapse, he saw a fire sale. Instead of retreating, he went to the bank. And not just any bank, but to the legendary Judge Thomas Mellon, founder of one of America's most powerful financial dynasties. Imagine this scene. A skinny, sickly 23-year-old youth enters the office of a gray-haired financial patriarch and asks for $20,000, a colossal sum at the time, to buy what everyone else considers trash. Mellon sent his agent to check the collateral. The agent returned and said, "The lands are good, but Frick works like a man possessed. He himself oversees the furnaces. He lives in the office. He is a bit strange, but he knows what he is doing." Judge Mellon gave the money. Frick bought up competitors on the brink of bankruptcy. He bought lands, mines, furnaces. He worked 18 hours a day. When the crisis ended and demand for steel soared again, it turned out that this quiet bookkeeper controlled 80% of all coke production in the region. By 30, he was a millionaire. He was called the Coke King. But money was just a tool. Frick developed a philosophy that would become the foundation of his future home and his tragedy. Absolute efficiency, complete absence of sentimentality, and ruthless elimination of obstacles. For him, workers were just lines in an accounting ledger, no different from the cost of coal or equipment depreciation. If a line became unprofitable, it needed to be crossed out. In the early 80s of the 19th century, Henry Frick was at the top of his world. He had the best fuel in America, but he needed a buyer capable of absorbing this ocean of energy. He needed a partner who possessed the same scale of ambition, but a completely different character. And that man was already watching him. Andrew Carnegie, the world's most famous steel magnate, was looking not just for a supplier, he was looking for a general for his army. He was looking for a man capable of doing the dirty work, while Carnegie himself played the role of benevolent philanthropist. Their meeting was inevitable. It was not just a business acquaintance, it was a merger of ice and flame that would forever change the face of America and lay the first stone in the foundation of the mansion on Fifth Avenue. In 1881st year, Henry Clay Frick made a deal that cost more than any money. He did not sell coal. He, in a sense, sold his soul to obtain the key to an empire. Enter Andrew Carnegie. If Frick was ice, silent, reserved, always in black, then Carnegie was fire. Short, energetic Scotsman with a white beard who loved to philosophize, write essays on the gospel of wealth, and, most importantly, craved to be loved. Carnegie wanted to be the richest man in the world, but at the same time wanted to be known as the saintly patron of workers. It was an impossible contradiction. He needed someone to do the dirty work, someone who could fire, cut wages, and suppress riots, while Carnegie himself traveled through Scotland and opened libraries. He needed a bad cop on a planetary scale. Frick was the ideal candidate. During his honeymoon in New York, yes, Frick even turned a romantic trip into a business excursion, he met Carnegie at a formal dinner. The Scotsman's toast was prophetic: "To the partnership that will shake the world." Frick merged his Coke empire with Carnegie's steel giant. In his early 30s, he became chairman of Carnegie Steel. It was a merger of two worlds: unbridled production power and cold financial dictatorship. Carnegie gave orders: more steel, lower costs, and Frick was the mechanism that ground through people and resources to fulfill that order. But Frick needed something more than just factory smokestacks. He needed status. That same year, he married Adelaide Howard Childs. It was a strategic alliance of the highest order. The Childs family belonged to Pittsburgh's old money, that elite which looked upon upstarts like Frick with polite disdain. Through this marriage, Frick bought himself a history he did not have. He ceased to be merely a distiller's grandson. He became part of the aristocracy. And it was then, in the early 80s, that the prototype of that very great house began to take shape. The newlyweds settle in the Clayton estate in the prestigious East End district. It is not yet the palace on Fifth Avenue, but it is a proving ground for ambitions. Frick begins to rebuild the house with maniacal meticulousness. He hires the best architects, demands that every detail scream respectability. But the most important thing happens inside. The walls of Clayton begin to be covered with paintings. Frick begins buying art. At first cautiously, consulting with dealers, afraid to make a mistake. He buys salon painting, landscapes, what is fashionable. But very quickly his approach changes. He applies to art the same strategy as to coal: only the best, only the rare, and at the most advantageous price. Why did the ruthless industrialist, who could coldly throw thousands of families out onto the street, stand for hours before canvases of French romantics? It was an attempt at purification. In Pittsburgh, where the sky was black even at noon from factory soot and snow fell gray, paintings were windows into another world. A world where harmony reigns, where there are no strikes, where beauty is eternal and controllable. Frick realized that owning a factory is power over people's bodies, but owning a masterpiece is power over time. Clayton became too cramped for his ego. His collection grew, as did his fortune. By the end of the 80s, Henry Frick was no longer just Carnegie's partner. He was a man whose fortune was valued in millions and whose influence extended from railroads to the White House. However, behind this brilliance lurked a dark cloud. In pursuit of exclusivity, Frick and his rich friends created an elite hunting and fishing club on South Fork Lake. To have their own private lake, they neglected repairs to the old dam. They wanted privacy and comfort, ignoring engineers' warnings. This elitism, this desire to wall off from ordinary people with a high wall, or in this case, water, became the harbinger of catastrophe. Frick built his world so that the dirt of reality could not penetrate it. But reality has a way of breaching dams. By 1892, the stage was set. Frick had power. He had status. He had a collection demanding a palace. But to build an eternal legacy, he had to go through the most terrible trial in the history of American business. A trial that would forever stain his name with blood that even the world's most expensive paintings could not wash away. Let's jump to 1914th year. Henry Frick leaves smoky Pittsburgh for New York. But he does not just buy housing. At the corner of Fifth Avenue and 70th Street rises a fortress disguised as an elegant French palace of the 18th century. Architect Thomas Hastings received an unspoken but clear task: create absolute silence. When you cross the threshold of number 1, New York disappears. The walls of Indiana limestone are so massive that the hum of the metropolis dies instantly. This was Frick's main psychological need: total control. After decades of factory clamor and cries of strikers, he bought himself sterile eternity. Let us enter the famous Fragonard room. Here the walls are paneled with the series Progress of Love. The irony of history. These Rococo masterpieces were commissioned by the favorite of Louis XV, but rejected by her. Frick bought them from John Pierpont Morgan for a sum on which one could build an entire factory. Tender pastel tones, loving couples, flowers, all this surrounds the man considered stony. This is not love, it is a trophy. Frick made even romance serve his greatness. Go further into the living hall. This is the heart of the house. There is no family coziness here, only imperial scale. Furniture by André Charles Boulle, heavy bronze, and above the mantel, Saint Jerome by El Greco. The stern elder in red robes looks down from above on the stern old man in the armchair. Frick loved to sit here for hours in solitude, reading newspapers under the gaze of the Inquisitor. The mansion had more than 30 rooms, but it always seemed empty. 27 servants moved through the corridors silently, like ghosts, using a system of hidden passages so as never to cross paths with the master without being summoned. There was even a huge organ built right into the main staircase. In the mornings, Frick breakfasted to the sounds of solemn chorales that filled the marble emptiness, as if in a cathedral. This was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum for a living man. Every Qing dynasty Chinese vase, every 16th century carpet, every Rembrandt on the wall served one function. They created a barrier between Frick and the rest of humanity. The house was designed so that any visitor felt insignificantly small, and the master immortal. But behind the limestone walls hid not only pride, but also an unhealing wound. If you think Henry Frick was simply a soulless money-making machine, look at the surviving financial documents of that time. On many papers that he held in his hands was printed the portrait of a little girl with curls. This was Martha, his eldest daughter. Her death in 1891st year became the event that forever froze the magnate's heart. The tragedy was absurd and horrific. The girl swallowed a pin. For 4 long years, she slowly faded before her father's eyes. Frick, who could buy entire cities, proved utterly powerless to save his beloved child. It was this loss that turned his professional toughness into absolute, inhuman cruelty. Just 1 year after Martha's funeral, the infamous Homestead strike erupted. Frick refused any compromises. He hired 300 armed Pinkerton agents. The outcome is well known: a real battle, 9 dead workers, dozens wounded. The Monongahela River was stained with blood. All of America cursed him as a monster. But almost no one knew that in those very weeks, when Frick was waging war against the Unions and survived the assassination attempt, he was burying his second child, a newborn son, Henry Jr., who died in August of that same year. In this emotional vacuum, Helen Frick grew up, the surviving daughter. She became not just an heiress, but a catalyst for his transformation. Helen was the only one who could break through her father's armor. Their relationship was a complex interweaving of love and duty. She idolized his strength, but acutely felt the hatred that surrounded their family name. Frick became a living paradox. During the day, he could coldly ruin a competitor or evict striking families from their homes, and in the evening, he turned into the tenderest father who read books to Helen in the library surrounded by masterpieces of painting. Was he a villain? History says yes. But this was a villain driven not only by greed, but also by monstrous inner pain, which he tried to drown out by acquiring perfect beauty. He built this house not for himself, but as a refuge where death could no longer reach him. By 1919th year, the world around Henry Frick had changed beyond recognition. The First World War had ended, taking old empires with it. Unions were gaining strength that could no longer be fought simply with rifles. But the main crisis was unfolding not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the silence of the offices of two aging billionaires. Andrew Carnegie was dying. The man with whom Frick built an empire, and whom he hated with every cell of his body, felt the approach of the end. Carnegie, always craving public love, feared eternal cold. He decided to reconcile with all enemies before departing. He sent his personal secretary to the mansion on Fifth Avenue with a proposal for a meeting. Carnegie wanted to shake the hand of his old partner and forgive old grudges. The scene that followed became a legend of American business. The secretary conveyed the dying man's request. Frick, who was almost 70 years old by then, listened to the message while looking at his impeccable paintings. He did not flinch. His response was short, cruel, and absolutely honest. "Tell Mr. Carnegie that we will meet in hell, where we are both headed." This was not just a refusal. It was an admission. Frick did not seek redemption through fake handshakes. He accepted his fate. But it was this realization of impending death, and Frick died just a few months after Carnegie, in December of that same year, that triggered the final transformation. If he could not cleanse his conscience before God, he decided to cleanse his name before history. Frick understood. Coke would burn up, steel would rust, and money would depreciate. The only thing that would outlive him was beauty. In his last months of life, together with his daughter Helen, he finalized a plan that seemed madness for a man of his reputation. He decided to give it all away. The house, which had been built as a fortress of alienation, was to become public property. It was a paradox. The most reclusive man in New York bequeathed his most intimate space to the public. But it was a calculated move. Frick created a trust, allocating $15 million, a colossal sum, for the maintenance of the collection. He wanted his house to remain untouched, so that in 100 years people would walk on the same carpets, look at the same paintings, and see the world through his eyes. Here Helen Frick played a decisive role. She never married, devoting her life to preserving her father's memory. She became a vestal in this temple. It was she who insisted that the collection not be sold off, that it not dissolve into the faceless halls of giant museums like the Metropolitan. She wanted the Frick collection to remain a personal, almost homey experience. Frick was dying in his bedroom, surrounded by things he loved more than people. His transformation was not that he became kind. No, he remained a robber baron until his last breath. The transformation was in something else. He understood that true power is not control over factories, but control over memory. He exchanged his blood-stained millions for the eternal canvases of Rembrandt and Vermeer, making perhaps the most successful deal of his life. When on the 2nd of December 1919th year, the heart of Henry Clay Frick stopped, New York froze. But not from grief, but from surprise. The will stated, after the death of his wife Adelaide, the doors of the house on Fifth Avenue must open to all. Forever. In 1930th year, after the death of Adelaide Frick, the heavy bronze doors of number 1 on East 70th Street opened. For the first time, those very ordinary people whom Henry Clay Frick had kept at rifle shots distance or behind high factory fences all his life entered inside. They saw not the office of a tyrant and not the lair of a capitalist predator. They saw perfection. Today, the Frick collection is a unique phenomenon. It is not a cold museum where exhibits are hidden under glass with dry labels. It is still a home. By the terms of the will and thanks to the iron will of Helen Frick, who lived to 96, almost nothing has changed here. The furniture stands as Frick placed it. The paintings hang where he decided. Time has stopped here. But what does this story really teach us? Henry Frick proved a frightening, cynical, but absolute truth. art is the only currency capable of completely laundering history. The blood of the homestead workers has long been washed away by rains, their names erased from gravestones. The hatred of the journalists has crumbled in the archives. But Vermeer's Officer and Laughing Girl still hangs on the wall and shines with the same light. We come to this house and forgive its creator. Or more precisely, we make an unspoken deal with him. We enjoy the beauty bought with blood money, and in return grant Frick the immortality he so craved. He acted like the Florentine Medicis, bankers and intriguers who remain in the ages not thanks to their financial machinations, but thanks to sponsoring Michelangelo. Frick won his last battle. He understood that an industrial empire is temporary, while culture is forever. He transformed the brute force of coal and steel into the refined power of oil paints. In the finale of this story, there is the greatest irony. Frick and Carnegie promised each other to meet in hell. Considering their deeds, it is quite likely that they kept their word. But here, on Earth, at the corner of Fifth Avenue, the most hated man in America left us a small, impeccable piece of paradise. Next time you find yourself in New York and enter this mansion, listen closely. In this ringing silence, among the masterpieces of Rembrandt and Turner, you will not hear the cries of strikers or the roar of furnaces. You will hear only the quiet, calm triumph of a man who bought himself a place in eternity. This is the truth about the Frick Mansion. True beauty often grows on very dark soil, and perhaps it is this contrast that makes it so dazzling